Good afternoon, everyone. We are approaching 12 o'clock now. I just want to make sure that, first off, that audio is working. Dawn, I see you sent a message to panelists. We were on mute as we were getting ready. Would somebody be able to just put in the chat box real quick that they can hear us or hear me? Perfect. Thank you. So today is going to be our first webinar in our PREA series called Unpacking PREA, the North Carolina Approach to Victim Services Behind Bars. So this series is a completion of 3 regional trainings that we did as part of PREA with training across the state. We started out east and then went central. And then as the coronavirus hit, we had training planned in the west. I believe our original date was around this week. And because of coronavirus, we were unable to do that, to meet in person. So what we decided to do was turn it into a webinar series for everybody. Today is going to be our first of 8. We are fortunate enough that Tracy Wright is able to join us and host this training for us. It is called Grounding in Humanity. This will be an acknowledgement of the issues and concerns arising in a pandemic. And after we talk about this a little bit, we'll have an interactive discussion on social justice and its impact on the movement to end violence. So I am going to, if Tracy is ready, I'm going to unmute you, Tracy. Let me know if you're ready now. And we can get started.
I am here and I am ready. Is there a way for me to share my screen?
It's already shared, actually, so
Oh, okay.
you're already up.
Cool beans. Um, Thank you all so much for joining today. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Bren. And so what I'm going to ask us to be able to do today, hold on one second, Brent. I can't
Okay.
see what I'm sharing.
It's just your PowerPoint presentation. That's all that's being shared.
And I can't see it to
Oh,
move
you
it.
can't see it. Let's see. Let's see, Gabriella, I know you're in here. I'm going to unmute you real quick. Would you be able to walk Tracy through getting her screen shared on her side so she can be able to see where she's at?
Yeah, I'm gonna try and figure that out because I don't know why she's not able to see it.
Let's see. So Tracy, if you go into and you pull up Zoom and hit share screen, it should give you the option of what to share. If you click PowerPoint, that's all we'll be able to see from your screen, and then you can just follow it from there, and we'll be able to see as it progresses when you get the slides.
Okay, we'll figure it out. Thank you all so much for joining again. And so here's what I want to say. I really hope that this can be a conversation. I encourage everyone to use the chat if you have questions, to answer any of the questions that I will pose throughout our time together. Understanding that we also are just going to be in conversation and deep listening and community with each other. And so time won't be our constraint. If we talk for an hour, we'll talk for an hour. We talk for 45 minutes. If we use the whole hour and a half, that's totally fine. One of the things that I do want to say on the front end about how we'll move through our time together is simply an acknowledgement. I acknowledge that using the word grounding is really, really hard and difficult when so many things are uncertain. I want to everyone to understand that this is not a call out space. Actually, it probably should have been called an invitation to um, actively listen, uh, invitation to value lived and living experiences. So I'm asking you all to participate and accept that invitation. The way we'll spend our time today will be divided into three parts, called the past, the present, and the future. And for our time together, the way that we will identify those three points are through BC, DC, and AD. BC being before COVID-19, DC being during COVID-19, and AD being after disease. Um, Understanding that this conversation really has no right or wrong, no wrong. It's simply concepts. For this time, my last name being right is the greatest misconception and lie during our time together. And so when we think about this word ground, right, we have to understand that it's a noun, and it's the solid surface of the earth, firm or dry land. The verb is to place on a foundation, fix firmly, settle, or establish. The idiom for ground is is to break ground, to being upon or take preparatory measures for any undertaking. And that's really why I am in this space with you all, because you all are going to be able to spend the next couple of weeks together in community in this collective learning. And it is imperative that we have spaces where we can ground and settle all of these things, that concepts, ideas, definitions that we'll move through together, really is for you all to hold, let go of concepts as you move through this robust offering by way of NC CASA in regards to PREA. Before COVID-19. So the first question that I want to pose to folks to fill in the chat is to let me know who you were 64 days ago. Who were you 64 days ago? 64 is important because 64 was the day from today, 64 days from today was when we began to be in quarantine. I see that folks were extroverted, busier, anticipating, uncertain. Thanks to folks who contributed to that spaciousness. Who was I 64 days ago? I'm certain that is the question you all are pondering. 64 days ago, I hadn't stayed in my house for 64 days consecutively. I hadn't stayed in my house for 64 days consecutively in 10 years. I hadn't cooked a meal in my home. I hadn't been to the grocery store. I had an unrealistic rhythm in my life. I was extremely self-righteous with no accountability. I had began this process where I had started to think about how to actively listen. I didn't speak kindly to myself. I was weary. And I think those are things that, as we think about the past, and let me be very clear, it was really hard to think about who I was 64 days ago. It was hard to think about what was important, what was I working on, what was I doing, because those 64 days just feel so far and distant from today. And I think, when I think about those 64 days, I'm thinking about a lot of the work that I knew that I was doing beforehand a little bit, right? So I had to really refresh my memory about what was going on. And it led me to think about this term that we use, that floats around in numerous ways, called social justice. And so I think we have to take a little bit of time to really, before we explore what this really means to us, what this really means to us for our work, is to take the word apart. The definition of social, which is an adjective, means relating to, devoted to, living or disposed to living in companionship with others or in a community rather in isolation. Words that are so present when we think about who we are, our current lived experience. When we think about the word justice, the definition of justice, we're thinking about righteous, moral rightness, the administering of deserved punishment or reward, the administration of what is just by law, as by judicial or other proceedings, right? And so it's interesting when you kind of think about how we use this word and how we combine it, how we think about it, how we attempt to practice it. And I found this Wordle that had like all of these things that were really, you know, some of the conversations that I know that had begin to happen in a very different way. And we're talking about education and identity, understanding, oppression systems. And then when you combine the word social justice, you end up with a noun, which I also think is really, really critical when you're thinking about the approaches around social justice, because a noun is a person, place, or thing, right? And so the principle, what social justice means at its core simply is the principle that all members of society have equal rights and opportunities. And I think that when we think about approaches to doing social justice work, we have to address the isms that are associated with making sure that all members of society have these rights and these opportunities and these liberties and these freedoms. And then that took me to a deeper dive of a lot of the language that was really a part of my work in the past, that is true today, and it is a part of the remedy, I think, that we have to think about collectively when thinking about a brighter tomorrow. And so, I want to acknowledge a lot of the language that is a part of the work when we start thinking about gender-based violence, when we start thinking about social justice. In the language that we've used and what we're talking about, and it was robust and it was sitting on our palate in a very different way, was racism, oppression, sexual violence, healing. Is one of those terms that we have thought about as processes when we're thinking about what survivors need and what that looks like. Healing services, healing practices. We were having a lot of conversations about the school to prison pipeline. We were talking about substance abuse in multiple ways, right? Because I think it's fair and important to acknowledge that when we start talking about and even unpacking substance abuse in a way, even there are two very, very different perspectives, right? And you have to think about those perspectives and how those things essentially intertwine with the language before we even get to substance abuse. Is thinking about, when we think about substance abuse in its current context, we're talking about the opioid addiction. And then when we're talking about it in the past content, we're really talking about crack and cocaine in the 80s and 90s, and those practices and policies and racism and oppression and manifest in that way. And you end up with two very different responses, right? And so you end up with a public health framework when we're talking about substance abuse today, versus a very real continued lived experience when you're talking about the war on drugs that had a very, very criminal justice influence and impact. And so those kind of two things are counter, and those two things are pieces of language that we have been thinking about deeply. I hope we've been thinking about deeply, and hope we were thinking about deeply before we entered into this BC space. Equity, equality, education, thinking about education in a different way, thinking about teacher pay, thinking about politics, thinking about capitalism, inclusion, living wages. Like, what does a living wage really look like in this country, in our communities today? These are some of the things that have been really present in a lot of our conversations and a lot of our work before we entered into a pandemic. We also were thinking about restorative justice, alternatives to the criminal justice system, really thinking deeply about the relationships that we had. And when I think about relationships with each other, relationships with survivors, relationships with entities connected to a system response that led us into thinking about the value on those relationships, that led to conversations about really taking a step back for divestment and investment. Where are our focuses going, and where should our focuses be going? Understanding that we need to have a survivor-centered focused in all of our work. Those are my thoughts on language that we were leaning heavily into before the COVID pandemic. I want to hear, and please use the chat feature to let me know if there's other pieces of language that resonate when you think about how we were approaching our work, how we were even interfacing with our communities, how are we talking about our work. Those are pieces of thoughts on my thoughts on language. Any other folks want to share any thoughts around language as we move from BC to DC? Cool beans. I'm okay with silence, right? That's something new too that I gotta say about who I wasn't 64 days ago. Um, and then now we're gonna move into more of a present conversation, really thinking about DC. Who are we during COVID-19? And so that is the cue for us to ask, for me to ask another question. And so your second question during our time together is, who are you today? Absolutely. Um, we are living under different assumptions about what these definitions mean to people, especially in terms of access and lived experience. Absolutely. Not minimizing the anxiety and fear of COVID and incorporating that into our every language and discussions with the intersection, oppression, and the systems we function in. It's so complex. Who am I today? More cognizant, mindful, trying not to get caught up in productivity as my work. Yeah, I'm a snap for that one. Yeah. And all of them. Thank you. A new learner. Yeah. Innovative, expansive. Open-minded. Absolutely, Tracy. You have a name I appreciate. Having to be more creative with the work. Ooh, the way we reference communities that are marginalized in our society, marginalized communities versus communities that are marginalized. Robin just dropping jewels. Finding more entry points to critical conversations. Yep. And I thank you all for contributing and being honest and open and vulnerable in that process, fully acknowledging that now is hard, right? And I'm certain because I asked you all the questions, who are you today? You are sitting on the edge of your seats waiting to hear, who am I now? I heard your voices loud and clear. Here we go. I have been home for 64 days. I have been to the grocery store more than I ever have been in my entire um, adulthood. I have a slow pace that speeds up and slows down when it needs to. I listen more intently. I am patient with myself. I've had really livid nightmares. I miss my mom a whole lot. Not to say that I don't, but it's just a deeper thought about her and her safety and well being, which were always things that were on my mind, but they are pressing. Um, I really want to hug my friends. I need a hug, one of those good old Robin hugs. I am worried about young people um, deeply because I know that, we as adults collectively have had a lot of space to think about our responses around COVID. Um, but I worry about if they have had the spaciousness to really talk about how the world, it shifts, will impact them, not only today, but in time to come. So the folks who have been really, really heavy on my mind are young people. And I think if I were to dig a little bit deeper, I would say explicitly, I'm really thinking deeply about kids of color, and I'm really thinking about kids from marginalized communities. I am sending them positive thoughts all throughout my day. They're part of all of my conversations because I just worry about what all of this means and how all these shifts will impact them. As we continue and stay in parallel until how we talked about language of the during BC, we do have new language in DC, right? Toilet paper. Like, yo, it's really been a scavenger hunt to find toilet paper. I've never been so anxious about toilet paper ever in my entire life. And I grew up really, really poor. But the concern and frustration with finding um, toilet paper has been rough. And I have a gratitude practice where I write down things that I'm really grateful for. And every time I find toilet paper, I'm like, oh my God, you find toilet paper. This is great. It is well. Zoom is a new part of language and existence. We are on it all day long. Um, I was thinking about like, yo, we should have really bought some stock in Zoom many moons ago, just thinking about how much money and how we have leaned into this tool to be connected to one, Another another piece of language is stay at home. Um, Unemployment is a piece of language. I was watching in a reality, in a lived experience. I was watching the news yesterday and I heard this report around unemployment in North Carolina and how calls to just receive to sign up for unemployment, how they shift from 1 month to another. In March, they were saying that they would experience, calls of about 6,000 a week. And this week alone, they are anticipating that they will receive 65,000 calls. And that is a hard, harsh reality to sit with. And it is this new ongoing, I'm not going to even say it's new, it's this new language that, just sits in our minds. Stimulus, contactless, school, what will that look like? What will it be? Home learning, um, accessibility. I think another piece that we also have to acknowledge with all of these thoughts around language is grief, and grief in just multiple ways. Grief in the loss of life, the loss of this understanding of what normal is, the loss of, anticipation of things monumental. I think about young people when I think about grief. I'm thinking about high school seniors, and I'm also thinking about eighth graders, and I'm thinking about uh, pre-K kids who were graduating on to kindergarten. Just this, this grief and this sadness, and making sure. And when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about how do we give spaciousness to all of those things. Even when we think about our work, we work so hard and have so much anticipation about, our products, our productivity, our offering for our constituents, for our members, for survivors, and then those things can't happen or can't be. And so I think, it is a space of sadness, and it is a space of grief. And I think that we have to kind of acknowledge that grief is, in times like this, extremely robust and ever present in multiple ways. We have to think about masks in different ways. Never in my life did I think that I would walk into a bank with a mask on and ask a bank teller for some money. Right. And those are adjustments. Those are things that we have to think about. In this time, we've single-handedly bought back parades, right? And so parades are a part of our language, really centering heroes and making that expansive across the way. If you are living and trying and doing the best you can, like you're a hero in your own right. We are celebrating the least of us when we think about, how we viewed and thought about essential workers and folks who are in our community who we historically had walked on by and had not thought about. And now it's this shift in this value and this thought process around heroes. Technology and accessibility really have come up in multiple ways when you think about who has access, in any fashion. Technology, access to conversations, access to space, access to food and support that they need in this time. So those things are really, robust in multiple ways. Food insecurities, those things are really, really exposed in a way. TikTok, I think it's fascinating that we have downloaded the app. I have downloaded the app, and we are paying attention to an app that is connected to time, right? And we have time to TikTok and practice joy when and if we can to enter into it, right? So it's just these notions and things that that have just been, percolating in my mind about the language that was not really a part of even my thought process. But was it, right? Because I think, we can think about, during COVID language, but we would be remiss in this time together to really pay attention to the language before COVID and how all of these things are parallels. Like we talked about racism and oppression, sexual violence, and we talked about inclusion and equity, and those things manifest in this DC language and lived experience in really different ways. And so I just hope that we can um, hold those things in parallel. And I hope that you can hold those things in parallel, especially as you move through this webinar series, as you think about, survivors, as you think about the criminal justice response, as you think about survivors who are in facilities, survivors who are in community, and all of these things just manifest and are part of our language in a different way, but they are a result in some ways when we think about the things we've been thinking about in regards to social justice. Definitely, you all know I've been thinking about young people, and we hosted a series of listening sessions a couple weeks back, simply to give young people a space to talk about these things. And it was really fascinating how they created community and shared lived experiences and provided affirmations to each other. But we also heard the really hard parts around the youth experiences in regards to COVID. We've heard from young people who have spent their days, they are, immigrant young people out of Idaho who were talking about how hard it was to navigate the unemployment system for their parents. And so it was just one of these fascinating things. I had been thinking about unemployment, but I hadn't been thinking about like what it was for a young person to have to navigate that for their parents in the midst of a pandemic, really trying to figure out, navigate that for their immigrant parents. And so it's just all these things. I know that there are kids whose parents are first responders, and the parents are, a single parent who had to send her son away so that he could be safe, and just all these different things around the experiences of young people, of course, and all the impacts from before COVID to COVID now have been on my mind. The last two pieces of language here, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about social distancing and pre-existing condition with really an equity, a racial, an anti-oppression lens. But before that, I do want to see if you all have any contributions to allot any language that you are experiencing or thinking about during COVID right now. So let's go back to the chat and insert. Yep. Oh God, you all filled in the spot. So I was going back in between things. Yes, hand sanitizer, Lysol, essential worker. Yeah, yeah. Toilet paper. Search for toilet paper is real, Cynthia. Paper towels too. Loss of ritual, weddings, graduation, community celebrations, to help keep us rituals and traditions help to keep us grounded. Um, yeah. Yes, exactly. Those society has deemed expendable are essential bus drivers, grocery stockers, and clerks, often wondering what matrix is using to determine who obtains early releases from prisons. Like, yeah, like we've heard a lot of conversations about who gets early releases. And I think the thing about it is we've seen some of those things happening um, And how does that impact community? How does that impact survivors when that happens? Because we're thinking about release into communities, and then it's like this dual kind of like conflicting notion of understanding. When you read some articles about the lived experiences, you hear from folks saying, I have a jail sentence, but that doesn't mean that I asked to die because of this, pandemic and this disease that is going around. And then it is early release. So it's all of these things, right? Value, survivor thoughts, right? Our survivors consultant when folks are being released. Yeah, yeah. So those are all of the things that BC and that DC that is all a part of our thought processes, right now in multiple ways. Is there any other language that folks want to continue to lift up? Thanks, guys, for the Lysol. Like, yeah, paper towels too. I have a lot of questions about how the determination for stores on what you get, because I've walked into numerous stores and there's more Kleenex than there is toilet paper. So like, it's just all these different things that are a part of language. So are there other pieces of language that folks want to add to the conversation that you are experiencing or thinking about now? Ooh, how are we internalizing 6 feet? Courtney, did you read my presentation? Because we are getting ready to move into social distancing. And so, 6 feet is interesting. That's how far we need to be apart. And it's also connected to death. We are buried 6 feet. So it's just this, interesting thing to think about. And in preparing for this, I took an approach that was a little bit different. And so I listened to and read articles, and I'll share those things with Bren. I captured Ntsikasa's staff statements on racial justice. I just thought about a lot of different things in attempting to hold space and construct like how we think about things. And one of the things that I found extremely interesting when we start thinking about this new way of life and this thought process and this to Courtney's point in thinking about like how we're internalizing this 6 feet and social distancing. This was really interesting. And it says, in many ways, and for so many of us, however, this doesn't feel particularly new. Our society has actually been built upon and defined by social distancing for many years. It's called systemic and institutional racism. From redlining, gentrification, poll taxes to voter purges, segregation in school, college debt, we have been kept apart from one another for decades, if not centuries. And I think that is really poignant when we're thinking about today and what it means to social distance. And when we add the context of really thinking about living in COVID right now, there's an old adage, and we're thinking about the folks who are most impacted, who have these pre-existing conditions, who have limited access to healthcare, who are essential workers because they are essential, and because when you think about economics, it really alleviates any choice on the matter. And we just think about the response, like in general, like if we're thinking about who has died in our communities. And when I'm saying our communities, it really is a global community, right? Who has died as a result in this country? And it falls in line with this adage. There's an old adage that seems particularly fitting for now. When white folks catch a cold, Black folks get pneumonia, and how this is a fundamental reality. The existing inequalities, particularly during a time of crisis, is seen even sharper in sharper focus during a global pandemic. And so when we're thinking about like this sharper focus and what we're seeing, those are really the things that we have collectively been thinking about in regards to social justice. Those things are clear, present, relevant, and a part of not just those people experience, but it really is a part of the human experience today. So yeah, our folks, can we really spend a little time? Let me hear your thoughts when you hear this or see this statement about social distancing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. This thought process of this new norm. Our community includes incarcerated survivors, marginalized identities are over incarcerated in our society. So the existing inequities are increased for those survivors. Absolutely. When you think about social distancing and you put this analysis on it, when we think about how social distancing really, it's new for us to think about it in the way in which we're thinking about it, but it really has been the lived experiences of so many folks. Thoughts? Does this make sense? When I get a yes, I'll move on, or when I get a no, I will stay still. Cool beans. This is hard for me because I want to see your faces and give you hugs and walk around the room, but because of social distancing, those things have just made connectedness really different. Thinking about how much being confined in homes affects mental health and getting real about how actual confinement, not to mean solidarity confinement, affects mental health for incarcerated people. Absolutely. Absolutely. The examples provided are good historical and current reference for social distancing and how we have to think about it. Yep. Oh, yes, confined, right? That's a piece of language. I'm going to add that to a new thought process too about current language that we also have to currently use. We've also had to think about like homes and the acknowledgement that all homes are not safe. Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about social distancing, and after this presentation, I hope that some of the concepts discussed will be a continued part of your, ongoing PREA workshops that you are thinking about, because I think they're all concepts. And I am going to go back and add confinement to it too, so that these things can serve as a guide as you all move through these trainings and are in a way really grounded to think about language and how we're using language and how the language of the past intersects and exposes the past in a different way right now. The second term I want to spend a little bit of time talking about is like pre-existing conditions. And so, to be clear, here's an excerpt from a piece that I read in preparation that was talking about, to be clear, a pre-existing condition is often defined as a medical illness or injury you had before you enrolled in a new healthcare plan. Those things could include asthma, diabetes, cancer, kidney disease, or even obesity. But the true pre-existing condition fueling the high death toll of communities of color and marginalized communities from COVID is something less visible, but just as real. And that really is structural violence. And that is really when we start talking about systems change, and we start talking about racism, and we talk about oppression and equality and accessibility, in a really different way, and thinking about how these things contribute to pre-existing conditions. And when we're thinking about structural violence, where it is to describe how social institutions harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs and reaching their full potential. And when we're thinking about those social structures, we're talking about economics, political, legal, religious, and cultural that order our world. These structures turn violent when they cause injury to people by lowering the actual degree to which someone is able to meet their needs below that which otherwise would be possible, right? And so, like, that was really interesting for me to read that and to hold that in these two, constructs of how we have thought about what a pre-existing condition is, and then to be in reflection, to really think about the pre-existing conditions of the world, the unhealthy conditions. When we talk about racism and violence at the hand of state, and we think about all these things that we have spent a lot of time and energy in thinking about when it comes to racism and oppression and social justice work, and how those things we're fighting, right? So when we're thinking about COVID, we hope that when we see those celebrations we know that those folks are fighting for their lives, and they're fighting existing conditions. And it just reminds me of the history around, when you take a moment to really be reflective about folks who have been social justice movements. It has been these fights against these things that have been pre-existing for a really long time. And now in this reflection, how do we think about the pre-existing conditions that are there in this, when you're thinking about pre-existing conditions around COVID responses? Any thoughts or energies there? Honk, chonk, or drunk now. What will people choose to do? Yeah. Meeting their basic needs is a struggle for incarceration, but even more so now, less access to TP, toilet paper, and soap have been found in some correctional facilities. Are there other thoughts around pre-existing conditions, especially when we're exploring it in these two real life, um, current pieces of language and lived experience? Other thoughts around pre-existing conditions? like I said, I will share out all of the pieces, and they're really interesting readings. You know, I got time so I can explore. It was just interesting to see the parallels when you think about where we are, and really that kind of, lends itself to what we're thinking about, who we want to be, and our responses. Here is this is an image that I actually made. That I was really proud of myself about. And it really was this thought process about the parallels between our work and how we are talking about experiencing COVID. Um, when you think about some of the responses around COVID, you hear COVID is not real, nor does it impact my community. And the work to end sexual violence we've done the same thing. We've heard the same things. We've heard the same things, that sexual violence does not happen or does not impact my community. We have been asking folks to wear a mask. Um, that is a part of our work, because when you think about what a mask is, our work really, a lot of our prevention work, a lot of our intervention advocacy work really has been about risk and protective factors, right? When you think about essential workers in the way in which we are now thinking about them now, we have to understand that we have always been essential to our communities, essential advocates, allies, stakeholders, survivors are essential to our work and our processes. It's how our work is determined, and we value who they are, and we are stand in the gaps with them. Where these two parallels are the same. When you think about COVID, it impacts the most underserved and marginalized. And when we think about sexual violence, we too know that this rings true, that it impacts the most underserved and marginalized. We are very clear that we are in a pandemic, right? Where disease is spreading. And we also understand that our work is an epidemic, right? That impacts far and wide and spreads through communities and lives, and potentially can have like lifelong effects. And at the end of the day, every message, every commercial from television, sports announcers, Ford, Bojangles, everybody has said that we are in this together. And I think this is the reality of how we have always done our work. We have always been in it together. We've always been exploring ideas. We've always been in it with survivors. And so I think that we can learn a lot. Our work can learn a whole lot about the existing parallels that exist between our work, how we fight COVID, and how we have fought, and our thoughts about ending all forms of gender-based violence. Thoughts or energies around these parallels. Yep. Yep. Oh, yeah. The current bail bond. Oh, I missed some comments. I'm sorry. The current bail bonding system that have left people incarcerated who have not even had a trial. Yep. People are blamed and penalized for having pre-existing conditions as though it was their fault for not taking care of themselves, and ignore systemic and historical violence. NC Corrections released info about steps they were taking to combat COVID. One I found to be helpful was allowing free cell phones. I worried about the mental health of an already isolated population. Me too, Kelly. We are starting to see increased volumes likely due to the pandemic. Juvenile justice facilities stop receiving visitors. So youth who need to stay connected to loved ones no longer had that time to look forward to. And so that increases their isolation. Absolutely. And so mental health, isolation, those things that we know to be true for folks who are incarcerated, we know those things are true for folks who, these sentiments and this thought process, when we're thinking about all these things, we know that these are survivor experiences, and how a pandemic, an epidemic, all of these things can manifest in a way that leads us really inclined to think about, of course, you know me well enough. We've been together for 55 minutes. So you know a question is going to come. And it's really as we move through this conversation of after disease. Um, who, which here's the thing, I totally get that this is a hard question to think about, but I invite you, because this is an invitation, this is a conversation, this is a value of lived experiences as we all try to figure this out together, as you all move through your learning experience. I think a little time, I invite you for just a second to think about, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Better. Um, I want to come out on the other side a better person than I was. Yep. Well equipped to handle change. Yep. Unafraid. Yes, Gabriella. An accomplice in terms of social justice. Yeah. I want to be someone that is a help to others. I want to be someone that gives, expecting nothing in return, to be a better person than before, a person that creates amazing projector factor for our community, protector factor for our funerals, that long after I'm dead and gone, my footprints will still be on the earth. Yes, more present, more flexible, more patient. I love that. That is amazing. Yeah, wiser. Yeah. In a certain, like, y'all want to know, Tracy, who the hell you want to be? I want to be a TikTok champ. Like, I really want to figure out how to do it. And to know me is to know that I am not a dancer at all. But I have danced more in my apartment, in this home, in this space that I've been in for 64 days, probably more than I ever have before. Which is fascinating. I'm not a dancer at all. To know me is to know I am not one, but I have been getting it in here, right? Because I am more present in my body. And I think that the thing that I want the most is to take a little bit more time to actively listen to folks, to hear them, and to make sure that I am grounded in a way where I can understand that everything is not about me. Oh yes, Kelly, I'm going to give away so many hugs. Oh my God, yes, I am. I really am. I am. I want to give hugs. I want to, yeah, I want to make a meal that someone other than myself can make. So I'm looking forward to that. Like, y'all, like when I say I'm really adulting over here, like I'm really adulting over here. I got a coffee maker. I've never had a coffee maker before. I got a humidifier so I can breathe. Like, it's just this thing that, like, I got groceries, I got sugar and butter and eggs. Like, I'm like, who the hell are you? But it's really, really nice. That, those things, those are some things that when I think about who I want to be, those are things that I do want to figure out how to hold on to. And I found this thing. This was fascinating. Oh my God. I really love this. I heard this on a speech on Instagram, and it really talked about um, just how we should, it was given in the context of how we should think about racism and oppression, about racism, but I think it's applicable in just a lot of ways when we think about allyship, when we think about relationships, when we think about like the work that we are doing against systems and what it means to really be an ally. And it said racism is not like a cavity in the tooth where a dentist can fill it with a filling, right? Filling. I spelled filling wrong. It is more like gingivitis, gum disease. If you don't brush and floss daily, it will come back up. And I was really taken aback. It was a quote I pulled back from um, this protest that was going on, and it was an ally really calling into the space around what it meant to be an ally, and how we should think about just these processes to be who we are. Like, it's not a feeling, right? Or feeling. It really is a daily practice. It's a daily practice to think about microaggressions. It's daily oppression, to care. It's a daily commitment to really think about others in a really meaningful way. And who I want to be really is, at the end of the day, with these things, I want to be a TikTok champion. I want to be a cook. I want to make sure that I am practicing daily to be a good ally, to be a good person, to be a good advocate, and understanding that that is a daily practice each and every day. Um, and I think that when I look at your thoughts around who you want to be, how you want to exist, it really has landed us at humanity, right? At humanity, which, we've moved through grounding, we've moved through social justice, pre existing conditions, social distancing, talked about the parallels between our work and living in the midst of a pandemic. And all of your answers really were, our collective answers were really, we want to tap into humanity. And when we think about humanity, it really is about all human beings, the human race, humankind, the quality or condition of being human, human nature, the quality of being humane, kindness, benevolence. And I think we also have to hold in context of the words that are similar, right? Related words to humanity, which, those were all the things that we want to be. Empathy, goodwill, compassion, generosity, kindness, goodness, friendship, people, feeling, sympathy, and charity. I am hopeful because your responses to who you want to be, and who I want to be with you is, and who Isikasa wants to be with you and be in this journey, and all together is really this deeper appreciation for humanity. Um, And that, in the midst of a pandemic, is extremely hopeful, in a place that I hope that in the midst of nightmares and insomnia, and trying to figure out how to do the work, speak kindly to myself, and think about productivity and what that means and rhythms of life. I hope that collectively we can lean in together to really be grounded in humanity. Um, yeah, that made me feel good. Thank you for sharing. Like, thank you all for contributing to that. And I like I said, I read a lot of interesting things. And when you think about humanity and think about what's next and who we want to be, and you know, um, AD after disease, what that looks like. I read this piece about this poet who won the Pulitzer Prize for his collection of poems, and the explanation for the collection of poems called The Tradition, which I thought was really relevant to our conversation that we've had so far. And the way that he explained the tradition and this collection that won the Pulitzer Prize, he said that it was all about we are inventing ourselves, he said. Invention means improvisation. Just because we are told a certain way of living is right or wrong, that doesn't mean that we don't have the opportunity to test what is really best for us, our people, and our family. And I think that is really where we are sitting as we think about the next steps of our work, as you all think about your journey through this webinar series, the other side of that webinar series. I hope these are principles that you all will hold on to. You can let go of what doesn't serve you. That's totally all right too. Because at the end of the day, I read this thing about astronauts who were talking about a mishap that happened on a space trip, and how, they were really anxious and worried about how it would turn out, would it work? And someone said, what if this ends up being our defining moment? And so when I think about humanity, I question and will hold myself accountable, and I will actively listen to in a different way, and I will practice gratitude in a different way, and think about the work, think about humanity, and wonder and aspire to think about what if this is our defining moment. um, so I'm going to leave with a question. And so that's the question. Thank you all so much for taking time for rocking with me today, and to hear my experiences and travel along the way. And any questions, any thoughts? Can folks unmute themselves, Bren?
Yeah, if there are any questions, if you just want to put in the chat box that you have a question, I can unmute you individually. If we unmute all at once, it'll cause a lot of background noise.
Okay.
That may be hard to hear. So if there's anybody with a question, please feel free to let us know in the chat box. Or if you feel more comfortable typing out the question, that's fine as well.
Oh, yes. Hard times require furious dancing. That's what I think I'm doing. Please make sure you sign up for the rest of the PRIA webinars. It's been great. And like I said, I'll share all these resources with Bren, to share back with you all. Thank you so much for sitting in conversation with me.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, for holding this space to open up our PRIA webinar series. Although this webinar wasn't focused solely on PRIA, we really wanted to create a foundation for everybody of how we approach our work. And I think Tracy closed it out really good talking about humanity, because as we move into further discussion around PREA, we're really talking about relationships and thinking about who we serve. So it's rape crisis center advocates, it's your correctional facility people that you need to stay in touch with, it's the survivors that you're speaking with. So we all need to keep these things in mind as we move forward. As Gabriella said, she put it in the chat box for our PREA webinars. You can sign up there. We'll be holding them throughout the next couple of months. There will be a couple weeks that we skip, but they'll all be held on Tuesdays from 2 to 3:30. So clear your schedule for those. And we will have one of our PREA contract trainers with NC CASA will be training with us. Her name is Lisa Cook, and we will also have an international trainer, Tara Graham from Just Detention International, joining her as well. They have trained multiple times together. They are a superstar team, so we really encourage y'all to come out to those. And in the meantime, as y'all have questions, feel free to shoot them to me or Tracy directly, and we can get in touch with y'all. And thank you everyone so much for staying with us. We can go ahead and head out a little bit early, and we'll see y'all at the next training. Thank you, everyone.